Okay, guys, today we're going to talk about the functions of the female reproductive system. So we're going to start with females. And while boy parts are more complicated, female functions are more complicated. I mean, come on, we have to like grow a human inside of us. So obviously we've got some fairly complex functions going on. So we're going to break it into 2 days, but today's going to be the first half of female functions. So functions of the female reproductive system. Number one, hormones. They are running your life. Ovulation, menstruation, conception, and pregnancy, right? And then when all this stops working, menopause. So today we're only going to go over hormone production and ovulation. Tomorrow we'll go over menstruation, and then we'll actually wait and talk about conception and pregnancy until after we've talked about the male functions, because it takes two, baby. Sorry, I'm going to move along now. So ovaries. Ovaries have two main functions. Number one is that they produce and then store the eggs. Fancy name for lady egg is an ova. That's the plural. Ovum is singular. They also make the hormones. So there are four really important reproductive hormones. FSH, which was follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, which is a luteinizing hormone. Both of those come from the pituitary gland. You might want to brush up on those if you don't remember. But the other two really important ones are estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen and progesterone are made inside of the ovaries. I shouldn't use this one. Made inside of the ovaries. Actually made inside of that little follicle, that little pocket that is also making the egg. Now let's talk about the egg. So remember, the egg is also known as the gamete or a germ cell, haploid. All of these are nonspecific to female. Male sperm are also called these, but this ova is specific to egg, to the lady part. If you ever see ooh, it's something to do with ovaries or the eggs. Estrogen helps you, talk about this in the endocrine system. It is responsible for sexual characteristics of female and the female reproductive organs, so things like bra and pelvis, breast development, blah, blah, blah. Progesterone. Progesterone's main jam is that it thickens up the uterine lining, that inner lining of the uterus that we said was the endometrium. And the reason it needs to thicken is so that a fertilized egg, Mrs. Egg has met Mr. Sperm, and they have combined and made a cell baby, can crash land into that thickened endometrium and develop there until it can develop a placenta and whatnot. Progesterone is super big and really important during a phase of menstruation that we call the luteal phase. You don't know what that is yet, but tomorrow you will find out. And then when you go back and look at your notes, it'll all make sense. How many chromosomes are in an oocyte or an ova? Remember that there are 23, because 23 from mom plus 23 from dad's sperm, don't know why I went over here like this is where dad's sperm is, will combine to make a baby, 46. Oh yeah, so ladies have all the eggs they will ever develop when they're born. They're not mature yet. They're like pre-eggs. They're like precursor to the egg. And you've got tons and tons and tons, and then only a fraction of those will ever actually be developed, and then only a fraction of the ones that are developed will ever be ovulated, which means kicked out of the ovary, which is what we are going to talk about soon. So that was ovary functions to make eggs and hormones, specifically estrogen and progesterone. Now we're going to talk about the fallopian tubes. So these roads, that one and this, are called fallopian tubes. Curriculum calls them oviducts. How weird. It's the road that once an egg gets kicked out of the ovary, which we call ovulation, this is the road that they travel on. So they have cilia, little hairs that waft, and peristalsis. Remember, peristalsis was the word for how a snake eats a mouse. Also the way for how food goes through your intestines. It's that wave-like rhythmic contraction that kind of pushes and propels the egg. Fimbriae are the little finger-like projections. They kind of do a wafty, like when you're trying to smell like perfume, and so you waft it to you. That's what they do that, because remember, they're not actually long enough to really touch the ovary. If fertilization of the egg by a sperm is going to take place and actually result in a baby, it takes place in the fallopian tubes. So we'll talk about that when you get pregnant and a baby is developing. It develops in the ovary, but that egg actually meets the sperm somewhere here in the fallopian tube. And so it's starting to divide and divide and divide and get bigger and bigger and bigger, because it has to be not pretty big, but it has to be more than just a couple cells big in order to implant in this endometrium. So if egg doesn't meet sperm until down here, it will still leave the body. It won't have time to implant and you won't actually get pregnant. Uterus. This is what a lot of people call the womb. It is a hollow muscular organ where the fetus actually implants and develops and grows during the pregnancy. So remember, egg meets sperm in fallopian tube, but it actually implants and grows inside of the uterus. The inner lining is the endometrium. That's the thing that thickens and sheds each month that you don't get pregnant, and thickens and stays thick if you do get pregnant, and doesn't shed, and that's why you don't have a period during your pregnancy. This we talked about. It's thickening so that there's a good cushiony, blood-rich layer for the for the fertilized egg to implant into. Again, fertilize means sperm met egg successfully, baby made. Cervix, remember, it's still uterus, but it's famous, so we talk about it separately. That's that bottom inch or so of the uterus that kind of protrudes down into the vagina, and it has that hole in it, that opening. So it's the lowest part of the uterus, extends into the vagina. There's that narrow opening. The narrow opening has several different functions. Number one, it's how the endometrium gets out every month. When a female has her period, it sheds, the endometrium sheds through that little opening in the cervix. It is also what babies are coming out of. So when we talk about, like, you know, she's dilated or she's dilating or whatever, that it's this. Dilating means to get bigger. So that tiny little hole right here, a baby can't come out of. So it has to get bigger. Once it's 10 centimeters, we consider that fully dilated. And that's when we start telling ladies to push. And also, if you got a baby up in there, sperm had to get there to make that baby happen. So endometrium comes out of the opening in the cervix. Baby comes out of the opening in the cervix, but sperm goes into the opening of the cervix and continues to travel into the fallopian tubes, where if it happens to meet an egg that has been ovulated, it will combine and make precursor to baby that then implants down here. Sorry for these next pictures. Let me just show you. Okay, so this is what we call a speculum. It's kind of like fancy duckbill version of salad tongs. So when you squeeze on this handle right here, these two things open up wider so that you can look through this hole right here and visualize the cervix. When women have pap smears, this is what's done. So a pap smear is when a doctor or a mid-level provider, like a physician's assistant or nurse practitioner, insert this into the vaginal canal. They open it up and then they look at the cervix, and they take some tissue samples from the cervix, and that helps check for cervical cancer, cells that are precancerous. But they also will usually, especially in your age of person, will take some samples and send and test for gonorrhea and chlamydia as well. This is the cervix. So what you're seeing here, this is a wall of the vagina. This is a wall of the vagina. The top and bottom are also walls of the vagina, but you can see they're being pushed back. That's because this clear speculum here is pushing that wall up, pushing this wall down. And so this right here is the cervix. This is a normal mucus discharge because the vaginal canal is mucous membranes. That tiny little hole right there is what the baby has to come out of. So that's why it has to dilate in order to let the baby out. Gonorrhea and chlamydia, talked about that. And then the vagina. So this is a side view of a person, of a woman specifically. So here's bladder, and here's rectum, and vagina goes in the middle. I always think, this is uterus, this is vagina, but I always, like, the reproductive system goes in the middle. I always think that if you get poop in your bladder, you get a bladder infection. So the reproductive system is trying to keep them apart so that there's less chance of that contaminating that. That's how I remember that: bladder, reproductive, and then colon. So the vagina is the tube-like passageway that connects the uterus, and specifically anything that comes out of the hole in the cervix, to the vulva, which are the outside structures in the woman that we learned about. So basically it's a passageway, and it's going to be very similar, that it lets the endometrium, which is the menstrual stuff, leave. It receives the penis. So instead of the sperm, it's going to say that it receives the penis during intercourse, which I think is the fanciest way ever to talk about the function of the vagina. And then a baby comes out of it as well when it is time for baby to come out. So external genitalia, remember that we collectively call all of this the vulva in a female, provides protection, basically. They do all have slightly different types of things, but in general, it's just protection for internal organs. Lastly, the structure is going to be the mammary glands or the breast tissue. Again, this does serve a reproductive function in a female. So the little lobules here, little lobes, are milk producing, and then they go through and allow breast milk to come out and feed the baby. Remember that prolactin is what stimulates all of this to happen. And here's the tons of lymph nodes, which again is why in breast cancer we biopsy the axillary, meaning the armpit lymph nodes, because of their proximity, their closeness to the breast. I believe, yep, that's it for today. I'll link this if you're curious to watch it. I think it's one of those Khan Academy videos. If you have any questions, let me know.